Good to see everybody back here. Hope everybody had a good feast. We've heard some stories so far. We enjoyed it, and I should start by saying bonjour. Kind of got into the habit of saying that for a couple weeks there. Of course, we went to Spain first, so we got a little bit confused as to what language we were speaking, but it worked out in the end. Then we flew back into Canada, and then we got even more confused. But we're back here in Michigan, and we can say hello. And we're back from the feast, and of course, you come back from the feast, and we're headed into a very dark time in the world. So it's good to stay focused a little bit on the feast, even after you get back, and keep those memories in mind. My wife and I have been able to enjoy the feast in various countries around the world. We've been fortunate to travel to a variety of cultures, stay on a variety of accommodations, and have some interesting experiences, both good and bad. Of course, you have the travels before the feast and after the feast that get a little bit interesting when you travel on a budget. But it just makes for good stories later. Of course, we met in Wales, so that kind of started off the string of traveling the world as well. Throughout most feasts, like our trip to Cortona, Italy, a couple years back, our accommodations are often simple but comfortable. For our budget, we don't typically stay in 5-star hotels. Our place in Italy was a simple apartment. It, had the basics. It had a bedroom, a kitchen, bathroom, and entryway. It worked perfectly for both of us. It was well furnished. It was more than enough for our little short trip. It was comfortable and very chic, as you could call it. The styling was great, had good pictures on the walls. It was our booth and our tabernacle for our feast, and we loved it. It was simple, it was cozy, and we really enjoyed that feast. But one thing's for sure when you're there, it's not home. While we're often at the feast, we just think of it as temporary housing, and we think of it as temporary being our lives now. But there are other things we can also learn from this as we travel. Whether it would be within our home country, most of you went to a place in the U.S., or a foreign country, there is more we can learn about a tabernacle. I'll just read this here really quickly. It's Leviticus 23 and verse 42 and 43. Leviticus 23 and 42, it says, "You shall dwell in booths for 7 days." And we do that. We go to some place that's not our home. "All who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." When you think about the Israelites, they had just come out of a place that they had been calling home for so long. It was Egypt. It was a sinful place, but it was still their home. And so now you're going into the wilderness, living in tabernacles, and it's very different. You have to shift mindsets a little bit. And we can learn a lot about the feast and last great day to directly apply to our own lives now. But what can we learn as we prepare to help those that will be coming out of this world eventually, and the world's systems? The majority of people will need to be prepared for God's kingdom. What can we do to help them cope with a new place, a new language, and new priorities and a new way of life? We can learn about that through our lives now, and especially through the feast, as we keep that in mind. One thing you have to think about when you travel, especially international, is a new way to connect all your devices. You don't have to typically think about this as much when you travel in the U.S., but when you go internationally, you start to realize, how am I going to plug in all my stuff? And it gets a little bit ridiculous when you see the plugs and adapters that I had, because I've got a camera, got Sarah's camera, got my phone, I've got Sarah's phone, I've got my laptop. We had to have FM radios so we could listen to the translation. So that's 2 more plugs, and it just becomes this mass of cords coming out of a wall, out of an adapter, because your normal plug doesn't plug into the one in Europe. It gets a little bit crazy at times when you travel internationally. And over the years, I've done this a few times when you travel to Europe, and you start to figure it out. And you plan beforehand. It's like, what am I going to have? How do I need to connect this all? You need to consider how to plug in all those devices you carry. We have all this stuff. and you need to use it. You've got a routine at home, and you've got it figured out. But then you go internationally, and it's all different. And even when you travel here, you go to a hotel, maybe you've got one plug that's easily accessible. All the other plugs are behind stuff. You can't reach it. Over the years, you've probably remembered that and said, okay, how am I going to deal with this? Maybe you'll take an extension cord. The thing is, it's not home. You have to adapt to this new place. Turn with me to Revelation 22. People coming into this new way of life that we'll be teaching will need to learn how to connect to a new power source. Revelation 22 and verse 1. Here's something that this world doesn't understand at this point. Revelation 22, verse 1. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal. This is unknown to this world at this point. Proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the midst of its street, and on either side of this river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of this tree were for the healing of the nations. Talk about a powerful source of life here that this world won't understand. And jump down to verse 14, it says, Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and enter through the gates into the city. There's going to be a completely new power source for these people to utilize in the future. It's not going to be home, and we're going to have to show them how to adapt to this, how to plug in. This is how you connected in the past. This is how you connected in the world. You used the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is how you connect now. Let's get you an adapter. Let's plug you into the tree of life. This is how you recharge now. This is how you download and learn. There are going to be new ways to connect with people, with families around them, their neighbors and communities. This is going to be unfamiliar to those people that are coming into this system. And it's going to be our jobs as seasoned travelers to help them learn and to make this their new home. God is working with us now, so we learn these tips and tricks along the way so we can help them make that transition more easily into that better future. So the next time you're trying to find that plug in that hotel, think about that people are going to be looking to figure out how to plug in the future. Another thing that you have to deal with a little bit more when you're traveling internationally is a language barrier. And of course, there can be a little bit of that even in the U.S. You get a very thick Southern accent, and I can't understand it usually. I've got some family members that have really fast ways to talk, and it's Southern, and I really have to focus to understand what they're saying. And different words can mean different things. If you go to England, there's some different terminology you got to be careful with clothing. So you have to make sure you don't say the wrong things. It's even more challenging in these non-speaking areas, like we just found out in France. And of course, being from the U.S., we're pretty blessed because a lot of the world speaks English. But as we work towards being in God's kingdom, we need to be learning a new language as well, and learning how to communicate in a new way. Turn with me to Zephaniah chapter 3. Let's see here. Right before Haggai, Zephaniah 3 and chapter 9. It says, "For then I will restore to the peoples a pure language, that they all may call on the name of the Lord to serve him with one accord." Now, often we assume that everyone will just have a perfect, unified language and will be able to communicate with one another and there won't be any profanities. Now, even if that is the case, we have to remember that given enough time, anything can be corrupted if it's allowed to be corrupted. We probably can assume that Adam and Eve didn't learn any corrupt language when they were created. They had a pure language to start. But how long did it take before somebody came up with something vulgar? How long did it take before somebody started using God's name as a curse word? Considering how many people use, curse words and just cuss in general. They'll take the name Jesus Christ, and they'll use it as a profanity frivolously. And if that's too harsh, so they don't want to offend anybody, they'll just shorten it to the first couple syllables of Christ's name. They'll throw around just letters to shorten it so they're not offending somebody. That's how the world does it. We always find some way to make something crude. So these people that are coming into this new world, we'll have to teach them a new way to even just deal with the language we have. We'll have to teach people how to communicate, what to say, what not to say, and why they shouldn't say certain things. From directly breaking the third commandment, or to make euphemisms for all kinds of phrases and words, it'll have to be more about the way people communicate than the actual words that are being said. If you go to a new country, you kind of have to learn how to communicate and maybe understand that certain phrases might be something different than what we understand in English. Is our language now a good example for others in what we say and how we say it? So again, we'll be there to guide these people on how to communicate in this new world. It's not going to be the home that they came from, but we'll have to help them make it their home as they learn to grow. How not to misuse the language they have, how to talk properly with truth and sincerity. Another thing you deal with when you travel, especially when you're going from home, is you can't take everything from home with you. You can't just pack up your whole house and then take it to the feast. And you get there and you're like, why didn't I pack that one thing? Or sometimes you get there and say, why did I pack this? This is just taking up too much space. And over the years, you kind of learn one way or the other not to pack this or to pack that. Whether it's a fancy hotel, an Airbnb, your hostel, or a tent, again, one thing is for certain, it's not home. And once you get there, you got to figure out what to do with all that stuff in your luggage. You open up your suitcase, and all that stuff just goes flying out onto beds, onto everything else, and you got to figure out where to hang stuff. And I've been to hotels, and there are no hangers to hang up my suit, so I've gotten into the habit of tossing a couple into the bottom of my suitcase. Again, where are the power plugs? Where are the light switches? Why doesn't this work? You're probably turning on the light for the guy next to you in the next house or something because something's wired weird in the Airbnb that you're staying in. Where do I place my wedding ring at night? When I go to bed, I take this off, and I've gotten into the habit at home of a certain place to put it at night so it doesn't get knocked off by the cat. Now, when I travel, I've gotten into a habit of clipping it onto the keys, so it's a little bit harder to roll away. Just the things you learn along the way as you travel to not lose things. Are these the things that we're teaching to other people in a spiritual manner with the way we live? Over the years of travel, you just find tricks to make things easier. Think of those people living into the millennium, those coming up in the great white throne judgment time. It will be a new place, a new time. It will not be home to them, at least not at first. We're going to be that travel guide for them, helping them to adapt and change so they are going to feel at home in this new place. What do they need with them? What do they not need? What do they not need to pack? What's just going to weigh them down in this life? Over the years, traveling to the feast or other events, you'll learn what you use and what you're going to regret packing along with you. We need to learn the same things about life. What in my life do I need to leave behind? What do I need to obtain before that trip that I forgot last time? We're going to be there to help others prioritize and arrange their lives to make it easier. Things like, you shall not have any other gods before me. What does that mean in your life? Leave this behind. You're putting this before God. Things like, honor your parents. That's a priority. Things like, remember the Sabbath day. That's not going to be something people understand, but we're going to help them to make that normal for them. People are going to be coming into a new way of life, learning how to reorganize what they do have, learning what they can keep, what they need to get rid of, and what they may need to acquire. If you want to start turning with me to Revelation 3. Revelation 3 and verse 18. There's a lot of things that we may need to acquire, maybe that we need to focus on before our next trip. 3 in verse 18, here we have the words of Jesus Christ himself. He says, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire. This is a priority. This is what you need to get before this trip, that you may be rich and white garments, that you may be clothed, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed. When you travel to foreign countries, sometimes you need to see how they dress, what's appropriate when you go into a certain place. You might have to cover up a little bit more than you're used to as a tourist. And anoint your eyes with eye salve that you may see. You go on a trip, you want to see what's there. You don't want to be blind. These are important priorities. These are what you should pack for God's way of life. These are the things that you need to leave behind, and these are the things that will weigh you down. This is what we're going to be helping other people to understand along the way. Just as we learn from our years of physical travel, we should also be learning from our years of traveling towards God's kingdom. These lessons may be more obvious while we are in our temporary dwellings at the feast, in a town that's not our home, in our country that we're not from, but we can learn these things year-round. We should feel out of place in this world just even right now. Just like what we do when we go to a hotel to travel, this is not our permanent home. Through this, we can develop empathy for those that we will work with in the millennium, for those that are at the beginning that have come out of this world in the tribulation, for those even in the second resurrection, they're going to feel out of place. This is not the religion that they grew up with. This is not the world that they grew up with. And we're going to be there to help them make this new system and this new way of life their home. And we can do that now with people who are being called now as well. We should become that seasoned traveler. We can be the one that gives them the directions. Travel tips, packing ideas, what they need and what they don't need. What are the local customs? How do you communicate? What to say and what to not to say? Let's be learning all we can now, preparing for that time to come so that we can help others to make that transition into God's kingdom when it does come.